Josie, it's yours.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Josie Badger, and I'm the director of the RAISE Center. The RAISE Center helps to provide training and support around transition for youth with disabilities to parent centers across the country. Today, we are so very excited to invite our friends from NICL, the National Council on Independent Living, to join us today and share some of the materials that they have developed alongside us to really make sure that parents, and youth are ready to start working in the realm of still work, working with skills, how to connect and how to use your time with the still to your best advantage. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Miriam to share accessibility features for today. Miriam?
Thank you, Josie. My name is Miriam Aliso from the RAISE Center, and I am going to walk you on how to interact with some of the Zoom features that we have available for you. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions to the presenters, and use the chat box if you have any technical issues. We have available closed caption. It's if you click on CC, you will see the captions popping up. And we also have interpretation to Spanish. Para acceder al canal en español, van a ver en la banda o cinta negra un globo que indica interpretación, interpretation. Haga clic allí y luego selecciona donde dice español y donde dice mute original audio. Esto último filtra completamente la señal en inglés para que puedan escuchar con claridad a nuestro intérprete de hoy, Luis. También we also have ASL, American Sign Language Interpretation. To pin the interpreter, please hover over the three dots on the right side of the name of the interpreter. And you will be able to select pin as it's indicated on this screenshot right here. So the three dots and then select on pin. All right, now we go to the presenters. Thank you.
Good morning, or morning. Wow, it might be morning where you all are. It's actually afternoon where I am. My name is Mary Kate Wells. I am the program director at the National Council for Independent Living, and I will be your moderator today, and as well as a panelist. I'm really excited for this webinar today to have a conversations with our panelists on how families and IL advocates at Centers for Independent Living can collaborate to support youth transitioning into adulthood. So we hope today that you're going to these are kind of the takeaways or objectives. We're going to talk about the role of parent-led organizations in educating families on how to support self-determination, empowerment, and independent living goals. We're also going to talk about the role of Centers for Independent Living, or CILs, as you might hear us call them, and how to communicate with families on the independent living philosophy. Also hear about how disability-led centers can work with parent-led organizations to really support and empower youth with disabilities. And finally, how to assist youth in maintaining their self-determination when their family's goals might not align with their own. We can go next slide, please. Today we have three speakers. We're going to be joined by Wednesday Jones from Able, South Carolina, Center for Independent Living. Dawn Monaco, Program Director of Youth Engagement, Project Director of Real Transition at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. And myself, I will be speaking later from the National Council on Independent Living. Just another note on questions. We are going to be answering questions at the end, so please use the Q&A box if you have any questions, and we'll be answering those at the end. So Dawn, you can take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Dawn Monaco, and as Mary Kate said, I am the program director at SPAN Parent Advocacy Network on youth engagement, and I work on other transition-related grants and projects. So I'm going to talk to you about the role of the Parent Center. First and foremost, there is a Parent Center in every state. We are federally funded from the Department of Education, and you can find the Parent Center in your state by going to parentcenterhub.org, and that'll be in the chat box as well. So you can, if you're looking for assistance and help, you just go there to that website and you'll find out the parents. Some states have more than one Parent Center, depending on the size of the state. And then there's also, in the community of parent centers, there are smaller centers called Community Parent Resource Centers, CPRCs, and they usually serve individual communities. They don't serve the whole state. So the role of the Parent Center is really to educate and empower families and youth on their rights in special education and also in the healthcare system. We do so by encouraging families to teach independence to their young adults and their children. We feel it's really important if we start early on teaching independent skills. We find that young adults have progressed a lot better. Better is not the right word, but the progress into adult life is more successful when they learn independence at a younger age. And the parent centers, if you go to their websites, you can find resources on how to go about doing that, whether it's finding curriculums that will help you at the age level on how to teach independence at home. And also to speak to your school districts on, what skills are they teaching in school that you can transfer to home. So teaching independence is really important. We want families to understand the importance of youth learning self-advocacy skills as early as possible, and that really comes hand in hand with independence. The parent centers do this by providing many trainings on different topics. Again, if you were to go to the SPAN Parent Advocacy website where I am, we have a whole section on our website on webinars and in-person trainings that we provide. And many of the other parent centers have something just like that. We want parents to never not know where to go for assistance and help. Many of the parent centers have warm lines that you can call for assistance in school or in independent skills. Roughly around 2014, the parent centers were charged with working more closely with youth and young adults. So prior to that, we were really targeting the families and the parents and the guardians, but we were charged right around that time with working with the young adults directly and finding ways to really listen to the youth voice when it comes to what works for them in moving into adulthood. So many of the parent centers, once that was charged, have really in the last 9 years it is, have really developed some wonderful youth-led programs within their parent center. Some of them have youth advisory boards. Some of them have actual youth on staff working with them directly. Some of them have leadership development series. So check out the parent center in your state to see what they are doing with young adults so that you can assist your young adults or the young adults of families that you work with to help them really build those self-advocacy skills in their young adults. We also work with families to help teach them the importance of dignity of risk. Because the parent centers are family-led organizations, um, most of them, or a majority of them, are families themselves raising youth, children with disabilities. And the dignity of risk is really something we try to help parents learn, because we all learn by making mistakes. And, you know, I'm a parent of a young adult with a disability, and it's sometimes hard for us to let go and to teach some of these skills that we're afraid, basically afraid. But dignity of risk is really important because everyone has the right to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. So we know, and we want families to understand, is when we build self-advocacy skills early, there really is a greater chance for them to then utilize what is called supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. So supported decision-making is really something that we all do on a daily basis. You know, when we want to buy a new car, we don't just go out and buy a car, although, you know, I guess some people do, but most of us will kind of reach out to friends and to family members and ask them, you know, what kind of car do you have? And why was that something that you chose? Or, hey, I see you have a Ford Escape, and do you like it? Why do you like it? And that is using support to make decisions. And so we want to give our young people with disabilities skills so that they can make decisions with the support of their, whether it's their loved ones or whether it's someone that they trust. It could be a teacher or an adult support person, whoever it may be, supporting them in life, but allowing them to make the decisions, because we know that the youth are really the drivers of their lives. Their voice is important, and we want to make sure that we hear their voice, and that we're sure that, you know, they're using their voice while they're in school as well. So a lot of our parent centers are doing work around student-led IEPs, because, you know, we know that they must be invited to the IEP meeting at the age of 14. And because that's when transition begins, although some states it's 16. But we want them involved in their IEP meeting and to feel comfortable in those IEP meetings. So we truly believe that ultimately they should be running those meetings because it's their life. And then the parent centers also provide support and resources. And again, we do that either through trainings, through warm lines, through the information on the website. So I think that my colleague, Lauren Agaratis, wants to speak a little bit more on this topic. Lauren, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Dawn.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Lauren Agaratis. I'm the product development coordinator for RAISE and also New Jersey coordinator for Family Voices at SPAN. I'm the parent of a young adult who, my tagline is, has 5 life-threatening conditions and autism, just to keep things interesting. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about our experiences in transition. Also, I'm supposed to describe myself. I've never done that before. I am a middle-aged woman with long, straight brown hair. I'm wearing a light blue and dark blue shirt, and I have blue eyes. Okay, so in New Jersey, planning for transition starts at age 14 in the IEP. So at that time, I contacted both DVR, the Division of Vocational and Rehabilitation Services, and our local CIL, Center on Independent Living, and got them involved in my daughter Stephanie's IEP. And she got some great experiences, your typical office experiences, such as copying, folding, mailing, shredding. She also got to be a camp counselor, which was really cool. And I had the agencies and DVR and CIL at every single IEP meeting until she turned, 21 and graduated. And I'm also, in the interest of full disclosure, on the board of my local CIL. And in terms of linking the PTIs and CILs, I think, the parent centers are more of a family-focused model, whereas it's youth and self-advocate model with the CILs. So, we at SPAN serve on the boards of our CILs, and we also serve on the statewide Independent Living Council. And I'll put a link in the chat on how to find your local CIL. I'm going to turn this over to Wednesday. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wednesday Jones. I'm going to describe myself both in the picture and in the view screen. So I am a 26-year-old Black woman. I have medium dark brown skin. And currently I have my hair in braids that go down my back, and I'm wearing a black shirt with a white collar and glasses. And the image on the screen, I have bob length hair, and I'm wearing a purple sweater, short sleeve. So my name is Wednesday Jones, and like I said earlier, I'm 26 years old. I'm a Black woman, and I have a developmental disability, so I'm autistic. I also have a physical and psychiatric disability. I currently work at a CIL, a Center for Independent Living. That's Able, South Carolina, which serves the Midlands and the upstate of South Carolina. And at that CIL, I am an advocacy and independent living program assistant. In my job, I focus a lot on the topics of intersectionality and multi-marginalization within the disability community, as well as inclusive and equitable policies. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a little bit about my experiences as a person with developmental disability, just growing up and what transition was like for me. So I was actually doing a project for school where I had to ask about my development, and my mom had just gotten a root canal and we were eating at IHOP. And so she was a little loopy. And so I was asking her, and she described me as a slow child. My family did their best to meet me where I was at. One of the examples was I had a delay when I was learning to crawl, for an example. So my grandmother would get on the floor with me and prop me up and crawl and try to get me to crawl and just really work with me on wherever I was at that moment. And they also helped me work on skills like, communication. My parents always set and my parents always expected me to achieve, and they always set high expectations. And they did the same thing for my brother who does not have IED. I am really grateful for this because I avoided the trap that a lot of us might know as learned helplessness, where a person, usually a person with a disability, but not always, doesn't know how to do a lot of things that they need for functioning in day-to-day life because growing up, someone always did it for them. My parents always expected me to do for myself. They assisted me, but they always expected me to do for myself. Though my parents, on the other side of that, though my parents knew that I was experiencing some delays and showed signs of autism, I was never taken to be evaluated for autism. They were aware. My mom had a degree in early childhood education, and my father was aware of some things too. And the way I was told about it when it did get to me, I was 14. It was less than ideal. It was through frustration with some of my behaviors that are associated with my autism. So I was making a noise by repetitive motions and repetitive behaviors that don't look typical of someone that doesn't have a cognitive disability. And because of that, I think this is partially because there is a lot more stigma around intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism when I was younger. So information was much more limited in the late 90s and early 2000s than it is today. And I was taken for an ADHD evaluation in middle school because my teachers, of course, noted something. And so I got taken for an evaluation for that. And I did have ADHD. But after that, it was kind of like there was nowhere to really go from there. So I didn't have a lot of connections to any disability resources. I didn't even know to identify myself as a person with a disability. And I was lacking a lot of skills that sometimes other forms of interventions would help. For example, learning how to tie my shoes or to be able to use silverware without making a mess, things I would have gotten in occupational therapy, but because I didn't have access to those sorts of resources, I never quite learned how to do correctly, at least up until that point of grade school, something that I didn't have a hold of. Next slide, please. And so going in through grade school, I struggled in a lot of places, but I'd never received any official accommodations. My mother, who was a teacher, did try to get them for me, but I ended up being denied. I remember going to a meeting with my teachers, and this was in high school, and they were there, and they were discussing me not doing well in some of my classes. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't know the purpose of the meeting. All I knew was they were, talking about how much, I was struggling and I was crying. It turns out that meeting was about accommodations, and I didn't quite understand what was really needed from me in this meeting. I was just there with my parents and my teachers. Out of the meeting, I was denied official accommodations, but my mom and my teachers worked out some unofficial methods. However, they were othering. They made me visually stick out from the rest of my class. And no one had any input from me on what I thought would work for me or what I thought would help me to do my best in school. So it was done for me, wasn't explained to me. And the experience overall was othering, and I dealt with some bullying and some looks in part because of this process. I did have good experiences in school, however. For example, I had an interesting experience with being in a somewhat integrated classroom because while I did struggle in some of my classes, namely things that had numbers, mathematics, I did really well in my other classes, and I was put in what's called the advanced classroom. Because of this, my school did this program where they combined the advanced class and the self-contained special ed class into one classroom. So we had 3 teachers in the classroom. We had a universal design in the classroom. Anyone could take advantage of an accommodation they needed, regardless of whether they were from the self-contained class or the advanced class. It didn't matter. So if you needed your test read to you, which I would do to help me pace myself, you could get your test read to you. If you needed to use your break time for extra study, you could do that. If you needed the information a different way, the information was provided in a couple of different ways, and you had 2 teachers roaming the classroom while one teacher was teaching, able to assist those who needed assistance. So it was a very good experience, and I think those years in school I did the best that I ever did when I was in that integrated classroom. In college, I needed some additional support, and I was referred to a psychologist where I was finally diagnosed with autism. Luckily for me, this was a pretty straightforward process. I went, I did the eval. My parents had to play a role of it because it was still an adolescent diagnosis, and then it was pretty straightforward. Then I had my autism diagnosis. And because of this, I was able to get accommodations at school. And I've also received therapy through school as well. So I developed better communication skills. We worked really hard on my social skills with me working through different scenarios and how to react to them, or how to better understand other people's emotions and where they're coming from. And so I got a lot of work in that area to develop my social skills. I also got a lot of development in areas outside of social skills and into the practical. So one of the accommodations I received was the school hired a graduate student to work with me and get me prepared to help me prepare for my classes, to look for opportunities to gain some of the skills that I needed to develop to help me get ready and set up for my week in the best organized way that I possibly could. And one of the things that this student success leader helped me with was to get involved in a Center for Independent Living. Next slide, please. So the student success leader that I work with found a program called the Youth Leadership Forum, which was put together by the CILs in the area, including Able South Carolina, and some other disability related organizations. I believe like Family Connection was involved in ours, I believe. Through this, attending the Youth Leadership Forum held together mostly by CILs, I learned about leadership and advocacy from which I got to develop. Oh, sorry, let me start over again. So leadership forum, you have to apply to get into, and you have to be accepted. And so because of the leadership skills that I developed outside of this, like I was in the Girl Scouts, which was very helpful for me because I got socialization and also got to develop skills. I had experience for advocating for accommodations in college for the first time and figuring all that out. And I was able to get accepted into the Youth Leadership Forum, which was a program for young leaders with disabilities. So I applied and was accepted to that. And there I was introduced to the independent living philosophy. I got involved with my local Center for Independent Living, which was Able South Carolina. That was one of the main sponsors for the event. While I was there, I got to meet all sorts of people, a lot of young people my age with disabilities, and I got to see the leadership skills that they were developing, the programs that they had been a part of and initiatives that they were leading. And there were a lot of professionals there with disabilities, and I got to learn a lot from them as well. So something special about a Center for Independent Living is that Center for Independent Livings are generally run by people with disabilities. The Center for Independent Living that I work at, I believe is right around 90% staff with disabilities. And the board, I think, is like over 80% people with disabilities. And so I met lots of advocates, professionals, and leaders who were disabled. Some had disabilities like mine, and some had disabilities different than mine, but they all shared that having a disability with me. And I found that it was really important that I was guided by my peer mentors with disabilities, because they were able to share with me from their lived experience, and often they spoke to me as their equal. So sometimes with professionals, I would get this condescending sort of tone. Sometimes I felt spoken down to because of, they might have read my documentation and saw the words low range of functioning in there, and then have a bunch of ideas in their head about who I am. But when I self-identified with a disability, and they were people with disabilities, and their initiation to me was me at the Youth Leadership Forum asking questions, and me as a full person, and they were and a lot of them had experienced that stigma too, and so that was something that I really appreciated. And I appreciated getting to see them in their professional lives and their independent lives themselves doing a lot of the things that I had aims to do too, and they knew how to do it. And so that was really important in my development. So they were able to provide something to me that my professionals and my parents were not able to provide to me by the virtue of that lived experience. I was also able to build networks of support. So by being involved in the CIL, getting involved in different organizations, interacting with other people with disabilities, I was able to build this network of support where I was able to do things that I might have found difficult to do before. Like, so college, for example, I had to advocate on a lot of places to get the things I needed. So my professors sometimes didn't want to give me my accommodations, or I had to go into meetings with the Disability Services Office and me and my professor, and neither of them were really quite working with me. And so with the CIL on my side, them teaching me how to go through the process, I was able to get what I needed to be able to graduate. I acquired a disability while I was there, and it wasn't so shocking to me to have to learn how to use a wheelchair and find resources to be able to make that transition physically, because I was a part of the CIL and I had those connections there and people with that lived experience. And so they showed me how to be more independent and getting around and doing the things that I wanted to do. And so that's a bit of my experience with Centers for Independent Living. So I was able to implement the things that I learned at the Center for Independent Living, both at home in my discussions with my parents, at college, and my community. At home, my parents, one time, guardianship was brought up with me because there were things that I struggled with when I initially tried moving out on my own. But I was able to advocate for myself and say, no, this isn't what I want. I don't want a guardianship. Just because I, failed this time around doesn't mean that we can't make adjustments and try again. And why don't we look at supported decision making? And here are some ways that you can support me and still, be there for me on some medical things while I still maintain my legal rights. And I had the education to know what I wanted, and something that could help my parents out as well because of what I learned at this Center for Independent Living. So I think it's really important for PTIs to work with CILs, and for parents to and for a youth with disabilities, those in transition age, to be able to get that information from a person who's had that lived experience and is also a professional, to kind of jumpstart where they want to go. Because while my parents, I think they would have benefited greatly from a PTI, because that would have provided them with a lot of information that they could have used in raising me. I think for me personally, as the person with a disability, that learning the self-advocacy part, the Center for Independent Living was very important. All right. Thank you. And that's a bit about my experiences with Centers for Independent Living.
Thank you, Wednesday. I appreciate everything you said and definitely can relate on many things. Hi, everyone. My name, as I mentioned, is Mary Kate Wells. I am the program director at the National Council on Independent Living. We are a cross-disability national grassroots organization run by and for people with disabilities. And we represent organizations and individuals with disabilities, such as Centers for Independent Living, statewide independent living councils, and other related organizations. And our goal really is to advance independent living for and the rights of people with disabilities. I realized I did not give a visual description of myself. So I am a white female with short red hair, wearing a pinkish sweater, and in my background, it's a blurred screen to hide my messy bookshelves. Just a little background as well. Prior to my role here at Nickel, I worked at a Center for Independent Living in Boston, Massachusetts, and I managed the youth program there. So I also have lived experience with disability. I live with a few different disabilities. So I've gone through transition as well, and I still, depending on what definition we're using for youth or young adults, I'm still in that, transition never ends. And so I had an IEP and a 504 plan in high school as well. So definitely relate to this topic as well. Next slide, please. So Wednesday did a fabulous job at talking about independent living philosophy and centers. And I'm just going to go a little bit more in depth so that, the audience has an understanding of what centers are and kind of the perspective that centers take, which, as you heard from Wednesday and Dawn, it's different, right? Parent run versus disability run. So independent living is, we kind of broken down into three things. It's a program offered through Centers for Independent Living. It's a movement off of the disability rights movement, and also a culture or way of thinking. And really, it's our goal is to maximize the leadership, empowerment, independence, and productivity of people with disabilities, and the full integration and inclusion into American society. Independent living kind of grew out of, or is moving away from, the medical model of disability that says that the person with the disability is the problem and that they need to be fixed. IL it takes the social model of disability that says society is the problem, and that we need to remove barriers so that people with disability can be successful and achieve their vision of an independent life. That also includes attitudinal barriers, whether that's discrimination or access to services or things like that. And this viewpoint really shifted to allow the control to go to people with disabilities, so that they can have options and make decisions about their everyday life. Next slide, please. So what is a Center for Independent Living? So centers were established under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which the only reason I'm putting the year there is it's the 50th anniversary of that significant legislation. And so centers are consumer controlled, meaning, like Wednesday said, 51% of staff, leadership, and boards are mandated to have a disability. Oftentimes, most centers, it's a significant more than 51%. Also, centers are community-based, so advocating for community living in that the community of that person's choosing. Cross disability, so centers work with individuals with all different disabilities: physical, mental disabilities, developmental, intellectual, blind, hard of hearing. I know at the center I worked at, about 75% of the youth we worked with had developmental or social emotional disabilities. So the full range of that. Also, centers are non-residential, nonprofit agencies, and there's no age limit. It's birth to end of life, and then no income requirements. Centers are free to access. There's one in every state, and most states, like California has like 20 centers, I believe. So depending on the size of the state, there's often multiple centers. And Lauren was nice enough to put the link in the chat. We'll put it in there again, where you can find your local center. Next slide, please. So every center is different, right? It's since it's consumer controlled, it's unique to that community's needs, right? So if their needs are a center who is more rural, that you know, where transportation, say, is hard or challenging, or internet access, and that center might have specific programs to support that community needs. However, all centers are mandated to provide these 5 core services. And those services are information and referral, independent living skills training, peer counseling, individual and systems advocacy, and transition. And so transition is the whole lifespan, whether that's transitioning out of a nursing home into the community, or transition to a youth transitioning into post-secondary life. And so centers can also have, like I said, specific additional programs. Like for some examples of that is benefits counseling. So if a youth is transitioning, is turning 18 or 22 and need to figure out how, if they receive benefits, what that looks like when they transition, or how college impacts any benefits they're receiving. Some centers offer employment services, home modification resources, self-advocacy, as Wednesday mentioned, in their experience, having that peer mentor and seeing people that have experienced some of the same things. And some centers have peer groups. This is a small list of things, but just to give you an idea of the different types of resources. Next slide. And so that's what a center can do. And I wanted to expand a little bit upon the IL philosophy, or the culture, which is disability-led and consumer control. You're probably going to hear consumer control a lot. That's it's very powerful, at least, you know, in my opinion. So IL really stands on the saying nothing about us without us. So historically, people with disabilities haven't been invited to the table, or even consulted, or, you know, even if they're at the table, they're not given decision-making power. So independent living really pushes for people with disabilities to be included, and believes that people with disabilities are their best experts of their own needs. So for youth, oftentimes that is about learning what are my needs, right? What are my goals in life, or how do I set a goal, or how do I communicate my goals or preferences? So oftentimes youth are still learning how to be their best advocate, their self-advocates. And then another kind of core belief is people with disabilities have the right to make choices and control decisions in their lives. Dawn and Wednesday spoke to this, right? Being able to make decisions, and then also being allowed to make mistakes. And it's what Dawn said is dignity of risk, to learn from your mistakes, right? And then the other core belief that people with disabilities deserve equal opportunity to decide how to live, work, and take part in their communities. And this is highlighted in next slide. This last piece is highlighted in this quote from Judy Heumann, who is a principal founder of the disability rights movement. And I know it's a little bit long, but I am going to take a minute to read this. And I just want to give a heads up to the ASL interpreter. I'll go slow, but just let me know. So this is a quote from Judy Heumann. It says, independent living does not mean we want to do everything by ourselves, do not need anybody, or like to live in isolation. Independent living means that we demand the same choices and control in our everyday lives that our non-disabled brothers and sisters, neighbors, and friends take for granted. We want to grow up in families, go to our neighborhood school, use the same bus as our neighbors, and work at jobs that align with our education and interests, and also raise families of our own. We are profoundly ordinary people sharing the same need to feel included, recognized, and loved. And I think that is a beautiful definition of what independent living means in consumer control. All right, next slide, please. So now that we have an understanding about what a Center for Independent Living is, what could their role be in youth transition or working with parent centers and youth? So centers really are a resource for students and families. Transition is one of our core services, and we're mandated to provide support for youth transitioning into post-secondary life. That's going to look a little different at each center, what youth programs are offered. But it also can be an opportunity for youth and families to be exposed and empowered as part of the disability community. Because we believe that that's being a part of that community can be really empowering. And in terms of consumer control, this is where, parent-led centers and centers for independent living might diverge a little bit, but where can we come together? I think consumer control can be really powerful for consumers, parents, and teachers, right? It can show that, the young person has this power, and learning how to use that power of their voice or their preferred method of communication. And really, parents can see the results of that, and then youth can build that empowerment as well. And I like to emphasize too that, communication, some feedback I've gotten from adults or not adults, but parents or teachers is that, maybe they're concerned that the center won't be able to communicate with their child or their young adult. And I would argue that IL advocates are trained and come from the perspective that youth can participate in any way that they prefer, right? So if they just need to be on their iPad and engage in some other activity when participating, that's fine. If you need visuals or prompts, that is fine. Any way that youth wants to participate is, that's their choice. And I think this is something centers are also learning to improve on, is how to be more accessible for youth with different communication strategies due to the disability. Another thing that centers can offer is, or I wanted to share kind of what it would look like if a parent or a youth came into a center. So from the first time you walk in the door, the parent is not the consumer. So a lot of times the IL advocate is going to really try to harness that young person's consumer choice. And it's an interactive process. It doesn't always go smoothly, but it's really a lot of times modeling for parents or support systems or teachers, always putting the choice and the power back to the youth. So that first meeting might be, you know, the advocate might ask the student questions directly. And I know that I think something that we need to kind of collaborate is making sure that the parent understands the role and our approach as Centers for Independent Living. And just one more example on that is that parents, like when I was at my center, I had parents reach out to me all the time, right? And so that from that first phone call, I always wanted to make sure that, hey, does your young person know that you're calling, or does your young person want to participate? Could they be on this call with us, right? So just that's kind of just what to expect when you're working with a center. And lastly, as I think Wednesday said this beautifully, I don't really need to go into it too much, but how a center can really support a young person's self-determination, empowerment, and independent living goals. And I think something that, especially when it comes to youth and young adults, that oftentimes they're learning how to set goals and communicate those goals. And an independent living goal can look different for everyone. So an example I always use is maybe that students or young adults goal is to pick out what they want to wear every day and have that choice. And that's an independent living goal, right? So I kind of like to think of it as a whole spectrum of goals. Yeah, I think everyone's different, and that is totally fine. Okay, so next slide, please. So we on the screen is, and we'll put this in the chat, is how to find your local center. So you can look up that website, and we'll put that in the chat again. And it could just be the first step is looking at the center's website that in your state, right? And seeing what kind of events they have, and are they connected to the Youth Leadership Forum? And the Youth Leadership Forums are in most states have those. And so that can just be a good starting step, right? And to kind of close this off, to next slide, please. I see some great questions in the chat. So before we jump into those, these are a list of the handout briefs that Nickel and RISE developed in collaboration with RISE. And it really dives deeper into the different things that we've talked about today. So I invite you to go on the website and look at some of those handouts. It might be a good tool to bring to, an IEP meeting or the parent center, or, help educate both sides, that type of work. So that is all for me. I am going to hand it over for question and answer.
And before we jump into that, guys, thank you so very much for doing this presentation. Wonderful information. And Lauren just put in the chat a link to those one-pagers. And what the purpose of these really was to help individuals, whether that's parents, youth, or individuals who work at parent centers, to start thinking about what is the overlap between parent centers and CILs. What is the same type of work that's done and what's different? How do we bridge that gap? And also, how do we help parents get ready to move into the CIL world? Considering that handing over the reins to a youth is sometimes new and very difficult. And so I hope you all take some time to look at that. And I'm going to turn over to Lauren and Miriam to to direct the questions and close us out. So thank you all so much.
Okay, we have a really good question for our first one. At what age do you recommend including a youth in an IEP meeting, begin introducing self-advocacy and IL? How is this applicable to young children ages 12 and under in preschool and up?
Lauren, can I answer that? It's Dawn.
Go for it.
So I would say for those that are under transition age, we recommend that you start bringing them to IEP meetings as early as possible. Now we know, and we as early as kindergarten, but we know a young kindergartner is not going to sit in an hour and a half long IEP meeting. But it's important for them to see the meeting and to come in and say hi to everyone and then leave, because the more they become comfortable in those meetings when they're younger, the better, and they're more comfortable when they're in high school, when they really should be participating in those meetings. It could be as they get a little older, as easy as just asking them what they like in school, what they don't like in school. It's important that they understand that these meetings are about them. This is their life, and we are advocates for them. And sometimes as a parent, it's hard to hand over that advocacy wand from yourself to your child, but this is their life. So the more they become comfortable being in those meetings at a young age, the better it is when they age. Because we hear from parents a lot that, yeah, they get invited, but they don't want to come. They don't feel comfortable, they won't speak. And so if we get them used to that meeting at an early age, they will be more comfortable when they get older, when they can really provide lots of input on what's working for them and what they want to do when they leave high school. Was that the extent of the question? I'm sorry, did I answer it?
I think you did, Dawn.
Yes.
Thank
Okay.
you. Okay, there's
I
another
could actually
question.
answer. Yeah,
I'm
no,
sorry.
the next one, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, what is the funding source for programs? Are parents expected to pay out of pocket? I know for some services offered are funded through Medicaid. Is this true for all?
Yeah, I would be happy to take that from the center side. Services at a center for independent living are free of charge. Centers are funded through state and federal funding and are mandated to provide these services. And they can be, a lot of times centers are connected with school districts. So sometimes you might get connected with them through the school. Sometimes, like I said, like parents reach out or students, find the youth leadership forum and that connects them. But no, I wouldn't expect a cost when attending a center.
And that is same for parent centers. They are federally funded from the Department of Education. Of course, there are some centers that may have other grant funding, but their main funding for training and supporting parents on special education, there's never a charge for those services. And honestly, there should never be a parent that doesn't know where to go for assistance or to educate themselves. We really want parents we want to educate them so that they can be the advocate for their child and then teach their children to educate for themselves. And really the first thing in teaching your child how to advocate for themselves is really talking to them about their disability, because you heard Wednesday speak about her disability. They really need to know what their disability is, what their needs are, what their strengths are, and how to ask for what they need. And they only can do that if they understand their disability. As parents, we tend to not want to talk to them about it because we are afraid of them, being hurt or being bullied or being, ostracized, whatever it may be. But we're really only hurting them by not talking to them about it. And that's the first step in building their advocacy skills.
Yeah,
But
and
there's no state for any.
yeah, I'll add a little context to that too. At a center is it's really when I would go into schools working with youth through the center I worked at, and some students did not know that they had an IP or didn't know the name of the disability. And the way I always explained it to young people, especially because, you know, at first, if they have no exposure to that language, then, you know, some people, there's a stigma and there's attitudinal barriers, right? And so the way I explained it to young people was, you know, this is the word they're going to use in college or in work, right? And even though if you don't identify with having a disability, I'm never going to force someone to do that. This is the word they're going to use if you want those additional helps or those accommodations, right? So if you're going to college and you want extra time on tests or you want additional breaks at work, this is the word they're going to use, right? So just echoing Dawn there.
Okay, our next question is, are there resources to help parents learn how to step back and allow the youth to self-advocate and make decisions, even if it means that they make mistakes? And I'm also going to say that our very own Josie Badger just wrote an article for National Exceptional Parent Magazine on thank you for letting me fail. And I posted that earlier in the chat, but for whoever else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question because, as I said earlier, as parents, you know, we can be scared, but so there's no resource that we can hand you that says this is going to help you learn how to do that. But we can provide resources that tell you the benefits of it and how the young person, you know, really moves through life more successfully when they're given chances to take risks. And, you know, we're not talking like, just let them walk across the street and see what happens. No, certainly, you know, reach out to those school personnel that, you know, are working with them for guidance. We're not teachers, we're parents. And so we need assistance, and the school has them most of the day. So there are professionals in the school that are working with them on, hopefully, depending on their disability, some of these independent skills and daily living skills. So I would reach out to someone at your school to say, you know, can I have some assistance in teaching that at home or working on that at home? But it can be, you know, really simple things that you allow them to make decisions on, and allow them to just make some mistakes and then maybe point it out, you know, see, that didn't work, but you know, that was a great learning experience for you. I don't know if anybody else has a resource that they can share for that, but I think that if you reach out to your parent center and just see what they have to assist you in that, or something that you want to maybe put a goal in the IEP. So all these goals can be put, if you see that your young person needs help with self-advocacy skills, bring that to the IEP table and have a discussion about that. And then determine as a team, because you as the parent or guardian are equal members of that IEP team, you know, have a discussion. Okay, he is struggling or he needs assistance in this to become an independent, productive adult in the community. That's why we're doing all this. And how can we help him? What kind of goals can we put in the IEP to help with those skills?
Yeah, we have more questions. Thank you, Dawn, for answering that one. Please keep posting your questions in the Q&A. We have some time for questions. We build that on the webinar, which is great. The next question is, are CILs required or will most assist in supports needed for the IL advocate? For example, creating a social story for a CIL activity, visual schedule, additional staff, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to start us off, but Wednesday, I'm curious what Abel, if you know, but so the center I worked at, I like mentioned 75% of our youth had developmental or social emotional disability, which is autism, ADHD, etc. Every center is going to be different. I'll preface that. I know at my center, every activity we did, we had it a visual option. a like a resource bank, interactive activities, really to be accessible to all our youth. That's actually something we had to learn how to do at our center. When I started, I noticed that we were supporting a lot of students with autism that required visual pictures or having word banks or something like that. And that's something we learned as we went. And I think that's something you can ask your center, local center, and are you able to provide this accommodation? It's an accommodation. So are you able to provide this accommodation? And if not, can we work together potentially on doing that? Wednesday, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
And like Mary Kate said, it's an accommodation, and we ask what accommodation students might need on forums before they get there, and then if we find something that someone needs, we try to provide it. Like if it's like a multi-day thing, so I've done a lot of events with youth and been a youth gone to the events, and something I always remember getting in my folder was a schedule with the time, what we were doing, and a little symbol telling me what it was. If a youth there needs like a communication board to do something, someone will probably make the communication board ahead of time. Should we know, okay, last time, we know this youth needs a communication board. So for this activity, we need to make a communication board for them. Social story. I've made a social story for a consumer before. I worked with them one-on-one. They needed a social story for something, and so I made them a social story. And now the staff now has it to use as a resource if anyone needs a social story on. It was a topic of understanding what's an emergency or not, and now that's just available for use in the drive. So at least at MyCIL, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, and that's just, I think, an example. And Wednesday, I don't know if you agree with them, like that's what CILs were built on, that peer collaboration of, okay, we don't have this, or we need to figure out this accommodation. So I think you'll find that most centers are up to any challenge, and we're all learning, I think. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I will say that too. We're all learning. So different CILs, just like different PTIs, are at different levels of things. When I went to MyCIL, something that we had to work on was better accommodating people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I came to work there, and most of the people on staff, had a different type of disability than that. And so when I got there, we had to work on a lot of accommodations things that, oh, well, we didn't have this in plain language before, but, it should be in plain language. And so that everyone on staff can be able to use it. And the thing is, so they had to learn and grow, just like any organization learns and grows. But if they're doing what they're supposed to do, they will adapt and do their best to provide for whoever comes for services there.
Very nice. So there's another question here. My child has engaged in every IEP, even if it was just to hand out their one-page profile. What are the ways you envision student participation in the IEP in elementary, middle, and high school on the path to a student-led IEP?
So I would say there's not one specific thing that I can point to on what exactly it would look like for every child. It really depends on their disability and their ability. So, some students will be able to participate fully and write up their own goals and have the whole meeting based on, I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to do that, like I statements as goals for future, for the future year in their IEP. Having, there are some young people that even up in the high school range, the most they'll be able to do is bring a sheet of paper with some thoughts into the room and read it to the whole group. It depends on the child and what they're capable of doing and the young adult. But the idea is that regardless of their disability and their level, that they're participating in some way. So, you know, I can tell you for my son, he was not able to recall very easily. So I worked with him the night before. And so, you know, just like parents prepare for the IEP meeting, sit your young person down and prepare for the meeting. And we would go through, what do you like in that class? What do you not like in that class? And then I would write it down for him. And that's the sheet of paper that he would bring to the meeting when he, as he aged and he was able to type himself, then we kind of moved into that. But that piece of paper was brought into the meeting, and he would read from that piece of paper when it was time for him to talk about what was working for him and what was not working for him. And you know, he was not able to do anything beyond that. But there are some people that will be young adults that will be able to do beyond that. I mean, really, ultimately, we want young people to type up a PowerPoint and run the whole meeting. That would be ideal, because this is their life and we should be following their lead when it comes to what they want to do when they leave school. Not everybody's going to be able to do that, but that's the goal. I mean, it's again, it's the level of the student, but and I think Michelle put this in the chat, it comes from the top down, you know, from the school district. If the superintendent has you know, a mind, understands the importance of the inclusion of young people in their IEP meetings, it trickles down to the rest of the staff. It's important for them to know that their voice is important. And so as a parent or a guardian, what you can do is, again, teach those advocacy skills so that, you know, your young person says, you know what, I have something to say. I want to tell you that I struggle getting from each class because the noise in the hallway hinders me and I get too distracted. So we can all say, you know what, Johnny, you can leave the classroom 5 minutes early so that when you walk to the next class, there's not that many students in the hallway, because that's something that, you know, will help you get from class to class, whatever it may be, as an example. So again, there's no, you know, it's whatever works for your child.
Okay, we have another question. One of the most shocking aspects of IDEA funding is that the federal government currently supports only 13% of their 40% obligation for IDEA. How does this funding gap impact our children, and how do we close the gap?
So I'm not going to be, and if anyone else can chime in too, I'm not going to be able to answer that fully, but what I can say is that, so centers are not funded or regulated under IDEA. They're regulated under the Rehabilitation Act. However, it's a very underutilized service. So even though like a center can't really be written into an IEP as a legal requirement, that's where, you know, families can, and students and parent centers can reach out to the center to provide extra support. I know that's not the way it should be, and it's not really fair or equitable, but I think, you know, as we work towards, or as the implementation of IDEA is enforced, that centers can be a supplement or a resource. That doesn't really answer your question, but
It does. Actually, IDEA has never been funded 100%.
yeah,
Has not. So thank you.
and I think actually that's somewhere now that I'm thinking this about, parent centers and centers for independent living can work together on those systemic advocacy issues, right? Centers,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
core services is systems advocacy. So I could see that as a potential like collaboration.
Yeah, the next two questions are really related. Can you clarify that a CIL is for all disabilities, not only physical disabilities? And the next question is similar. Can a CIL support youth with mental health issues attain resources and services?
I could take that one. So yes, CILs are for all disabilities, not only physical disabilities. If I caused that confusion when I was speaking earlier, it's simply because sometimes CILs need to work on that implementation of that. CILs need to work on disability competency themselves sometimes. But yes, CILs serve all people with all different types of disabilities. And yes, CILs can support youth with mental health disabilities or psychiatric disabilities attain resources and services. I've done that as a part of my job at a independent living center. People self-identify with their disability when they call in, and there are people with psychiatric disabilities who do call in for assistance with resources, and we do assist them. So any disability from autism to diabetes to high blood pressure to schizophrenia to anxiety to cerebral palsy to arthritis, like we serve people with disabilities across the board. Yeah.
Thank you,
you.
Wednesday.
I have two related questions in terms of accessing CILs. The first one is, are there ways for consumers to access CILs remotely, like when they don't live in the same city as the CIL? The second question is, do regional centers for independent living offer advocates to come into transition age classrooms to prepare students to use these centers?
Yeah. Yeah, I can take this one. So consumers, since the pandemic, most centers are continuing to offer remote services. If that's not the case in your area, and that service isn't available at your center, then yes, it would seem reasonable that you could access a different center in a manner that's accessible. There's centers in the state are kind of, I don't want to say assigned, but support specific service areas. But if that one center can't support you in that state, then it's consumer choice, right? And the second question was about centers coming into transition schools, transition classrooms in schools. That's going to depend on each center if they offer that resource. I know the center that I worked at, we attended parent special education parent advisory council meetings to do education and outreach. We worked with transition coordinators. We went into schools to do interactive activities on, goal setting and provide that education. So yes, some centers do go into the schools to provide that education. Yeah, Wednesday, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, my center goes into schools to provide education. We go in and we'll go be in a classroom and do a week-long course on self-advocacy, or a week-long course on self-directed IEPs or transition. So we would go into this, and we even had like an after-school program where youth worked on leadership skills. So it really just depends on the program that the programs that are available at that CIL, but my CIL definitely goes in the schools.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions here. How can the student who attends the IEP be taken seriously? And also the team presume competence instead of blaming the lack of progress on the student disability. This is very common in our district, and I wonder if there is a need for staff training in inclusion and diversity.
I take this one for a bit. I definitely agree. And I have done trainings for professionals before. And I think those are very important. Sometimes when I go into the schools to work with the students, I end up working with the teacher because of the teacher's maybe low expectation for the class. Like, oh, this student isn't going to participate. And I'm just like, do you really know that? And I'll be working with the student and presuming competence, and they participate in their own way. Like, calm down. And so, yeah, I do think there's room for it. I think it can, I would like, if someone else could speak to the the ability to like how to navigate that. But like especially with higher education, but professors have more leeway. I've been asked to do it. I remember going to I went to a I've gone to schools to, I've done presentation for school, for staff, sorry, it wasn't staff, it was for faculty of a school before on like just disability in general and disability in the classroom. But it's not something that I've gotten to do a whole lot. So I think there could definitely be more of it, but that is something that at least my soul is beginning to do.
Yeah, I think most schools would benefit from inclusion, professional development. I know it's very few that a school does inclusion successfully. From what I've seen, most of the successful inclusion situations are when there's a parent really pushing on the other end for it and advocating for the child. Which, you know, so it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, which is absolutely not the way it should be, because, you know we have many parents that aren't able to be in the school as often, whether it's from, you know, working or transportation or whatever it may be. So there's definitely a need. I know here in New Jersey, our, you know, New Jersey DOE is really concentrating on the topic of inclusion. That's an area that they're working on because they know that it's not as successful as it should be. So yeah, any kind of professional development in schools, I think would be beneficial.
Okay, we have,
oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Mary
I'm
Kay.
just going to do a quick plug that one of the briefs that and handouts that you can check out after is about, it's titled Maximizing Abilities Without Over or Underestimating Them. So that might be a resource to start exploring this topic more too with schools.
Okay, great. And I have another question here. Would the youth need an actual diagnosis of a mental health disability to get support?
From the CIL?
So from the center, no, you don't have to have a, you just have to self-identify as having a disability.
Yeah, something I've worked on with myself is someone who's like needed that documentation, like, and so they self-identified and we helped them get documentation for another purpose. But there are going to be roadblocks for like services maybe that the SIL wants to get them in contact with. That was something that I remember we ran into, but from services for the SIL, no.
All right, we have a last question here for the presenters. Can CILs be agency invited on transition age IEPs? I mean, if they can be invited to IEP, and how would they participate? The CILs on IEP meetings, if they can be invited.
Yeah, so yes, that's you know, up to the young person who they want at their IEP meeting. I live in Massachusetts, so I know Massachusetts Department of Education has not required, but strongly encouraged school districts to invite their local center to transition meetings. That doesn't mean that a center can go to every single young person's IEP meeting, just capacity. And so that will depend on each center. And then the part two, the question was, how would they participate? However, the young person wants us to participate. You know, if they just want us to be there for as an ally and just a familiar face or someone to speak, you know, it really depends on the young person.
Yeah, I second that. I mean, whoever they're comfortable and they want to invite to their IEP meeting, they can. Anyone who can be a support for them during that meeting. And if it's, you know, someone at a CIL that they've been working with and they feel comfortable with, yeah, they can absolutely invite them. If there's a coach on their, you know, one of the coaches in school or a teacher that they, you know, speak to a lot and feel comfortable with, they can invite them. You know, we call it person-centered planning. It's the person is the student and whatever, they want around them to help support them so that they, again, can have a successful transition to adult life. So yeah, absolutely.
That is terrific. Thank you. And I don't see any more questions. Do you, Lauren? No.
No, I just saw one comment that said, would you be willing to share the handouts? I found them very informative and valuable. And so again, we posted in the chat the link for both the slides and the handouts.
All right. So thank you so much for this presentation. It has been very informative and also inspiring to everyone. I mean, to me. Excellent stories. Thank you so much. On behalf of the RAISE team, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Give us,
everyone.
a survey will pop up soon, so give us your feedback. Thank you so much. See you next time.
Bye.